everybody. Welcome to the Psychedelics Today podcast. This is David Drapkin with Jon Dennis. And I'm really excited to get to talk to you, Jon, because we've done some work together and had collaborations before. Everyone knows you from All Eyes on Oregon, but this is your first time on the show. So welcome to you, sir. How are you doing today, Jon?
Thank you so much, David. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here with you and to be invited into kind of the Psychedelics Today ecosystem more generally. I just think you all are doing really amazing work and helping kind of create, I think of it as building the psychedelic future that we want to leave for our grandchildren. And I think you all are doing some really great work to help kind of steward that forward.
Yeah, thank you. It's just interesting that hearing you talking, Jon, it does feel like Psychedelics Today is part of this kind of national or international kind of movement, and it's almost like a bit of a laboratory testing, what's going to evolve in the future. And whereas you're really focused on Oregon, and that is America's lab, testing out how could things evolve around psychedelics, but particularly psilocybin. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a great episode to dive into what's happening over there in Oregon. But before we jump into that, do you want to just tell the audience a bit about you as a man and as a person, and kind of what brought you to where you're currently standing?
Yeah, thanks, David. So I'm an attorney by trade, and I've been an activist my whole life. I've worked in kind of nonviolent organizations, protesting war and torture and nuclear weapons proliferation and things like that, and have been kind of a lifelong dedicated advocate around social justice and poverty issues. I used to manage a nonprofit law office that gave free legal help to people living in poverty. And, I grew up in poverty. And so these issues have always been really close to my heart. And that's kind of part of it. And then with particularly the psychedelics angle, my dad was a minister kind of in the broad Pentecostal tradition. So I grew up in a kind of a spirit-filled tradition that really put a great emphasis on spiritual experience and people's relationships with their higher power. And after I kind of had a, kind of a religious fallout during adolescence, I, still had kind of a propensity or a drive to seek, kind of spiritual meaning or religious fulfillment. And so, as a kind of an interfaith seeker, then it kind of just naturally leads to, psychedelic. For many people, it kind of is a natural segue to explore it in communities that work with psychedelics.
Mm. Yeah, and I wonder if part of your experience has been the connection with psychedelics and justice, and fighting, for the underserved and the marginalized as well, and for peace as well. That's really coming out as part of what you're doing, because it's, when we have psychedelic experiences, the concepts of war and fighting are just so foreign and nonsensical, aren't they? Mm. So I wonder if that's part of your mission here, tying those together.
Yeah. Chacruna just published this book called Psychedelic Justice. And I love that phrase about what does that actually mean? And, we're in this transitional state where we're going from, total prohibition, virtually outside of very limited religious contexts, to broad wholesale medicalization, regulation. And so as we kind of usher in this kind of new era where society reestablishes its relationship to plant medicines after decades or longer of prohibition, there's just the rollout of this is just extra critical and extra sensitive. I think it's at this point, we all will agree it's inevitable that psychedelics are about to enter the mainstream. But how they enter the mainstream is important so that they not be kind of delivered directly into the hands of capitalists behind paywalls that keep out millions and millions of people. So I think of this work that we're doing here in Oregon, and the effort to try to kind of democratize Measure 109 and to create community models for psychedelics as very much as a continuation of the kind of social justice advocacy that has been a better part of my life's work.
Mm. And there's a lot to unpack in Measure 109, so we'll jump into that soon. Particularly the piece that you were just saying, John, that this isn't just about criminalization or kind of the medicalization. It's really coming back to where psychedelics, plant medicines have evolved with humans for millennia, for generations,
Mm-hmm.
before they were illegal, before they were underground, because they were above ground and part of society and woven into culture, and kind of rites of passage. So it feels like there are forces that are pushing for that medical model and the capitalized model, and they will succeed. So there's no way of stopping that. But I think the good fight that you're part of is ensuring that the other side that's not behind paywalls, that is more community cultural focused, and accessible, that survives. So I'm interested to obviously hear to what extent is Measure 109 going to do that, like if we had a crystal ball. So we're not quite there yet to know how it's going to look. Would you be all right just to explain to our audience what is Measure 109? Kind of where did it come from and why? Just its genesis to start there.
Yeah, so Measure 109 was a ballot initiative. And initially, it was Tom and Cherie Eckhart who had a vision of, I think, their story. It's a really great story. They just read an article by Michael Pollan, I think in the New Yorker or maybe the New York Times, and about kind of the therapeutic applications, and were inspired by it and thought maybe they could lead the charge, and they did. And now we have Measure 109. I think of it very much as a people's law. It wasn't something that was passed by a vote of the legislature through the political process. It was voted by the will of the people who volunteered countless hours, people who donated lots of money to try to create a system that actually overturned the vote of the legislature, which said that psilocybin doesn't belong in society. So that I think of that kind of people democratized part of that as a critical piece of this program. That this is very much people's law, and that's, I think, what many of us who are doing advocacy around this are committed to ensuring that by the time the program launches, it'll still be a people's law. Which, of course, has room for business. It has room for people to make livings, and even healthy livings. But that should be a room for everyone, regardless of economic status and that kind of thing. I think it belongs to all people, including the rich, but also including the people who are living along society's margins.
Mm. And with Measure 109 evolving over the last few years, could you talk a little bit about how it's going so far? I know that's a very broad question, but with that initial question, maybe start with what was that initial question that the people voted on in the referendum, and how's it going so far, just generally speaking, before we start getting into subcommittees.
Yeah. So I think the initial kind of thought, well, actually, when Measure 109, before it was a measure, I think even before it was an initial petition, the initial draft of the bill actually had, essentially, it was combined with a decrim law, and it was thought to be just kind of an open access that had professional services available, as well as just a more decrim type of home grow type of access within the program. And then I think because of dedicated, like a political calculus, it was reason that would not be perhaps as palatable to voters, and they wanted something that was going to pass. So they dropped the decrim piece and then turned it into what we have today, which is a it gets called therapy, like a therapeutic law in the press most of the time. And I like to say Measure 109 is undergoing a reputational makeover where people are starting to become more educated that the measure isn't expressly a therapeutic. It's not anti-therapeutic, but it's not exclusively therapeutic. In fact, it's more of a flexible framework that allows people to take psilocybin for virtually any reason. The hallmarks of the measure are that the consumer who takes psilocybin can't. It's not a dispensary model. You have to go on site to a licensed premises, and you have to take the psilocybin. You have to purchase it, consume it, and experience its effects entirely at the facility. And then only after your session's over and you're no longer really feeling its effects, are you sort of cleared to go about your day or your business. So it's really not a therapeutic model per se. It's really more of a supervised adult use at a place kind of system, and that's kind of the gist of it. And you know, and there's not really any and it's really clear in the law, like you're not the state cannot require a person to have a medical diagnosis to take psilocybin. So it's really available for pretty much any reason a person wants to do it, including medical and therapeutic applications, but also including wellness, including exploration, and also including religious purposes. So
Yeah.
it's just a broad psilocybin access regulatory supervised law.
And was that actually it proposed in Measure 109, or did that evolve after the vote as the kind of characteristics of how what people wanted it to be in the committees?
Yeah. So I think because during the campaign, they basically you branded it as therapy, and I think the reasons for doing that were largely because they did polling data of the voter base, and they found that the messaging that kind of had the most resonance was kind of autonomy and mental health care. And I think that's an issue that most people can agree on, that we ought to be able to try treatments that have potential, that have hype, and relatively well-established safety profiles. And so I think they kind of marketed it as that. And then during the board discussions, most of the board members, I think maybe all but one or two of the board members at the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, which was appointed by the governor, who's going through this recommendation process right now. They all have advanced degrees, like I do, like I believe you do too, David. Like many of us do, and and of course we bring those professional biases and perspectives with us, and so I think with the board being largely composed of doctors and therapists and psychologists, like that's kind of the angle that they approach this with. And so I think there's been kind of an attempt to, whether or not, wittingly put it in terms that in kind of a frame that looks familiar to those professions. So, but that's not actually in the law at all. That's what Measure 109 is. It's so I don't. Yeah.
And briefly, I'd like you to explain about Measure 110. So at the same time 109 was passed and voted on by the people, you're calling it the People's Law. What was 110 about?
Yeah, November 2020 was a great year for drug policy in the United States, in large part because of Oregon, but there was also other, successful initiatives during that election.
Yeah, I think for me in New Jersey, that's when cannabis was, for adult use was approved as well.
Yeah. And so Oregon had two landmark, groundbreaking laws. The other one being the decrim law, Measure 110, that also people talk quite a bit about. And so Measure 110 basically reclassifies 8 different controlled substances that if you have a certain possession amount of those substances, it's no longer considered a crime, it's considered a Class E violation. Now, the punishment for which is either a $100 fine, or you can be kind of relaxed from that fine if you call a drug treatment screening hotline and go through the screening. And you're not obligated to proceed with treatment if treatment is indicated as a result of that screening. But the idea behind Measure 110, and part of why it's such a really brilliant and sort of radical departure from the current punitive, drug war kind of model, is that it really treats, drug abuse as a medical problem rather than as a criminal problem, and if people are addicted and making poor life choices because of, substance, use problems, maybe jail might not necessarily be the best place for them. Maybe there's other ways that we can, encourage them to become more, like they're a better version of themselves, basically. And so maybe what they need isn't punishment, maybe it's help. And so Measure 110 not only kind of encourages interface with systems that are designed to try to help people, but it also provides substantial funding for those systems. And we're in the process right now of kind of developing those and trying to, expand capacity, because the amount of money that's now being devoted to this because of Measure 110 is way more than it was before. So it just takes time to develop that. And I think we're going to start seeing more of the treatment side of that come online here in the near future. But
Great, yeah, and that's hugely important. Just changing the budgetary kind of political lens that we view substances and use through, from criminalizing, punitive one to one of treatment for those that need it. Whereas, for Measure 109, that's actually saying just for psilocybin, not for all or any psychedelics, but particularly for psilocybin containing mushrooms. There's some benefit there, and it doesn't have to be clinical, therapeutic, or pathologizing with a diagnosis, but there's some benefit that the people of Oregon feel like the pros outweigh the cons. Like there's something there that they believe that people want and need and should have access to. So that's a huge statement to make, particularly when you've got the DEA, in the FDA, in the Controlled Substances Act. That's all there on a federal level. But the Oregon people, and I guess Oregon Health Authority following behind, are saying, this is what we are going to do here. We're not going to wait to see what happens, with Compass Pathways in a couple of years with their phase 3s. And well, let's do this now. What was the sense of the need? Like, why not wait and see what happens? What was the need and the rush?
Well, even I think what I hear you perhaps alluding to, or maybe not, but what I insert into that is kind of a recognition that, psychedelics in particular really can be healing even outside of a therapeutic, an expressly therapeutic. There are beneficial uses that don't necessarily involve like a formal relationship with a psychotherapist or medical doctor. And I think there's kind of a part of our as our thinking evolves and matures around these issues. There's a recognition that we may have rushed to judgment on things that because they were kind of associated with political movements that were at the time threatening to the federal government, like the anti-war movement and the Black Power movement, were considered very threatening to Richard Nixon when he signed the Controlled Substances Act into law. And I think it's John Ehrlichman was his I want to say his chief of staff, that later came out and said the whole war on drugs was specifically to target our political opponents, and it wasn't really based on science at all. And yeah, so it's kind of a, we're at this point, but to answer your question, I think the scale of human suffering is immense, and the depth of human suffering right now is immense. And if we only wait until Compass Pathways and other companies that are pursuing kind of legalized medical applications of psychedelic compounds, not only is that a long time to wait when people are suffering now, hospice patients are dying now, and to say that they have to wait, through even the 3 or 4 year or 5 year expedited, breakthrough therapy designation type of process through the FDA. That's like, we don't have time to wait. I mean, people are suffering now, and we have enough information to not need to be like really afraid of psilocybin and other psychedelics. So, I think that was kind of the some of the intent behind it, is a recognition that the drug war really just harms people, and it doesn't really have a whole lot of upside on a realistic kind of policy level.
Yeah, and in a very specific way, it's saying that psilocybin shouldn't be a Schedule One drug, and that it has huge potential, for good, and very minimal potential for addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's zoom out a little bit. So since Measure 109 was passed, my understanding is there are 5 subcommittees that are kind of really getting their hands dirty, like digging in the weeds and doing some hard work to figure out what this should look like. And there's kind of public consultation with the community as well as the committee members, trying to put forward their recommendations. Again, just as an overview, before we get into the weeds, what could you just describe how that process was designed and how it's evolved so far, and how it looks, compared to what the timeline is?
Yeah, so there's 5. So the Measure 109 itself requires the appointment of what's called Psilocybin Advisory Board by the governor. And so starting in May of last year, they convened their first meeting, and they've been meeting monthly ever since then. At the earliest days of the meeting of the board's existence, they started appointing subcommittees, and today there are 5 of them that generally cover the issues. The 5 committees are licensing, research, products, training, and equity. And so
5 out of 5, John. Good man.
Yeah, I was like, what of this?
Got 5 fingers, so yeah, it's good.
Thanks. Been at this, at this for a little while now. I got a year of practice now. But, yeah, so each one of them has its own kind of separate focus, and they try to evaluate the issues and raise them and bring them up to the full board after they've had some time to develop some of the ideas and the arguments on either side. And so then once those get reviewed by the board then makes recommendations based in, at least in part or in whole, on the subcommittee recommendations. And then the Oregon Health Authority ultimately drafts the rules, the regulations that will govern the whole program. And they're not obligated to stick to the recommendations. They are just recommendations. But with the last set of recommendations that the board made around the products testing and training rules, the OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, adopted all of those recommendations except for 5 of them. So I think the pattern has been established that there is significant deference, I think, that's given to the board in the recommendations that it's made, but it's not bound by that. So they do have a flexibility to decide otherwise.
Yeah. And the 5 subcommittees, what kind of criteria are there for the members of those subcommittees?
So the board itself is they're all members or residents of Oregon, and then the initial subcommittees were comprised of board members, but as time has gone on, some of the subcommittees have recruited members of the public that are not part of the full board, and some of them are not Oregon residents, um, including, for example, like Bia Labache and Hadass Alderman, a couple of really great advocates who are doing, now kind of officially engaged in Oregon's process.
Yeah, wonderful. And are there any less noteworthy influences in folks that are involved or trying to be involved in this process? Because just being honest, this is kind of a test case for America, and there's potentially a bit of a land grab here of trying to move in. So I'm just curious as to have you been seeing, or are there suspicions of more nefarious forces trying to carve out the territory?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, David. There are, you've probably seen some of the same articles that I've seen, describing conflicts of interest that may exist in Oregon among board members that weren't disclosed, voluntarily. And so, there's been, I'm just really grateful to the media. I'm thinking particularly of Shayla Love and Tess Risky of the Willamette Week and of Vice News, who've done really amazing reporting about some of the concerns that there may be kind of corporate interests that are influencing Oregon's rulemaking process in ways that aren't exactly transparent, and that may not be something that really reflects like the greater good, and that the conflicts of interest that have been alleged ultimately, under circumstances that I'm not entirely clear about, but it ultimately resulted in a decision of the full board to require disclosure of all conflicts of interest at the meeting that was going to happen in March, and just shortly before. Essentially, one of the last subcommittee meetings for the very last hours before the last training subcommittee, which Tom Eckhart, who was the chairperson of both the training subcommittee and the full psilocybin advisory board, resigned, rather abruptly, as those kind of allegations were pending, and so what the actual status there is, is not a matter of public record, to my knowledge at this point. So it's really hard to say, conclusively whether, laws were broken. But from my vantage point, whether ethics rules or other laws were broken in this process, in some ways is even almost besides the point, because even if somebody says, look, I'm a billionaire company who wants to erect paywalls behind a program and in the name of safety, then whether they're transparent about that or not, it's still a problem. I mean, there's plenty of other type of industrial complexes like that don't have to hide anything because there's nothing illegal or criminal about using money to influence politics. I mean, it's actually enshrined now at the First Amendment at the United States Supreme Court as free speech. So, there's a part of that is just a really difficult growing pain I think we are having in our democratic society right now. And of course, if Oregon's rulemaking process is going on in the middle of this broader social problem of money influencing politics, how can Oregon's rulemaking be totally immune from that? I don't think it really can. But that's why it is important for those of us who, have a different perspective on this, who have a different kind of goal, who would love to see radical, affordable access to all people. We have to really speak out and advocate that this program not leave hundreds of thousands of Oregonians and, I think over 37 million Americans live in poverty, and almost 600,000 Oregonians live in poverty. And to think that, we're just going to leave those people out because of an elevated safety concern, it's just really hard to kind of square that all together in light of what the actual risks of psilocybin in particular are. So, and I think that given these allegations and these, resignation, and this sort of thing that we're seeing in the midst of this, that if Oregon decides to create a program, the world's first regulated psychedelic services program that prioritizes business interests to the detriment of marginalized people, I think the historical record will bear the stain of scandal and corruption on this, and and it's. I'm very nervous because as the clock winds down, right now Oregon only has essentially 9 hours of full board meeting time to make all of the decisions that it has left to make in terms of recommendations about this, and so far there's been nothing, that would. No serious proposal or no serious talk about how we're going to make this program affordable to the hundreds of thousands of people living in poverty in Oregon. And as other states look to Oregon for leadership, progressive leadership on drug policy, I think that we don't just consider the poor and suffering in Oregon. I think we really have to think of that this is the model that will be used, all throughout the country or the world. So I think Oregon bears a unique and special responsibility to think outside of its borders with respect to the program it's making here.
Thank you, Jon. Really appreciate you going to that level of detail and sharing the passion of why it means so much for you, for Oregon, but yeah, the country. It's a test case. And I've always been just amazed and disgusted by lobbying in America. I just can't believe the role of money and lobbyists and kind of corporate interests in this country, whether, even if it's things like agriculture and guns and petroleum and all of that stuff, it's unbelievable. So I would hope that when it comes to psychedelics and to psilocybin containing mushrooms, that that is somewhat sacrosanct and separate, particularly because right now you're designing a framework that doesn't exist. Like hasn't happened anywhere before. This is the infrastructure. Like you're architects of a system that probably will evolve down the years and go through different kind of iterations. But to get this initial kind of template and blueprint down, how do we want this to look? If it's not for the people and for the masses, those that need it the most and can afford it the least, then why is it not being designed in that way? And who was influencing the design? So yeah, really important that now, before the final recommendations are made, that we're clear on who is making the recommendations and why. And I'm just interested. I know there's one really big issue close to your heart, but before we move into that, Jon, are there any moments where public participation in this process has really brought kind of a sense of importance and clarification about the mission here, about what you're doing? Like, have there been any particular talks, speeches that non-committee members, that just regular folks have given, that's really touched people's hearts or helped to steer the ship about where you're headed?
Yeah. So thank you for that. There is, I just found Dr. Bronner, or David Bronner, just wrote a blog post that is looking at the similar type of deal to what we're doing in Oregon, and he even references the Oregon effort to kind of democratize, a regulated psychedelics program in Colorado, and part of this is, the people who I think are most affected by this don't. I mean, there are people who would be negatively impacted by this. Are busy people, low income people, people who may not be like equipped to give effective political type of advocacy. And so there has been a number of calls from members of the public at these meetings. So there's public comment that's offered, or an opportunity to give public comment at the end of virtually every meeting now. And we've heard from quite a few number of people who are coming out and saying, that if the only option for legal psychedelic services in the world, like not on a like that are regulated and have kind of a stamp of sort of government approval, leave lots of people out of the equation, that's iniquitous and not acceptable. And so, in terms of there have been a number of really spirited public comments that have emerged, both in the meetings themselves, as well as in listening sessions and other venues that have been offered for people to weigh in at an official level. And then I've noticed on social media, I think these conversations are just starting to gain traction. And I think people are starting to become aware of just how important this is and how urgent this is, that something be done to set up the system in a good way. It is much harder to change a system that exists than it is to design the system right or close to right in the first place. Particularly where if there's concern about corporate influence coming in and influencing the process, in an industry that doesn't even exist yet. I mean, I did some looking into it a couple of months back. There's the market cap of publicly traded psychedelic companies right now is $5 billion, and it's not even legal yet. And it's $5 billion a publicly traded company, and that doesn't include the private companies. And none of them, to my knowledge, are really actively making money right now. They're all just hedging their bets about this. And, so I think there is this emerging, what I have been calling a psychedelics industrial complex, that it's not really that entrenched yet. But as these programs launch and people start making money, they're going to become more and more entrenched, and it's going to become harder and harder and harder to get good legal changes that really kind of open up access in a way that supports people over profit. There have been a few comments, but the conversation is relatively new, and I think as time goes on, there's more and more attention being given to it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jon. And I want to now move the discussion into something that, we spoke beforehand, it means a lot to you, and that's around religious liberty, and how the rules are being defined and how this whole psilocybin service might look. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what the discussion is around, religious liberty and entheogenic practitioners in Oregon in respect to psilocybin?
So in early February, I was invited to give a presentation to the licensing subcommittee about ways that religious freedom could intersect with Measure 109. And part of the challenge of the work of defining what religious liberties under Measure 109 might look like is that there's not very many lawyers in the country that really specialize in this narrow intersection of psychedelics and religion and law. And then further to kind of impose that kind of system on top of a regulatory system like in Oregon's is kind of it's almost like a law school exam question where, they're just like, it's a really kind of a nuanced analysis that has to go into this. But essentially the conversation got kind of started at a high level pretty late in Oregon's process, just having barely begun 2 months ago, and so that it hasn't really been able to take root as deeply into that as I would have preferred, just based on time. But right now, we've been so essentially in support of that proposal. I started trying to think it through of what that actually looks like and what that means. And I basically drafted a proposed model regulatory framework for protecting religious activity that would occur under the measure. And we since have received 2 votes of support and endorsement of that proposed framework from both the licensing subcommittee and the equity subcommittee. It was a 4-1 vote in licensing and 11-0
Wow.
in equity.
Strong.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it's one of the many topics that the board is going to have to pick up, and it's 9 hours of official board time that it has left to do. So that is basically where it stands now. And so the particulars of that proposal would involve several things. First off, broad ceremonial protections for communities, for religious communities that operate under the measure. We don't really know what part of the challenge of this is we don't know what the rules will overall be yet. So we don't know how specific we have to be, whether we don't know with complete confidence yet, for instance, that group sessions will even be allowed. So there's things like that most of us watching this assume that they will be. So trying to sit down and think through all of the things that will matter to sincere religious communities that want to operate under, above ground under the measure. It was kind of a challenging task. And so, we sought stakeholder input and, tried to look to other available models for how this could be done. And we came up with what I think is a kind of a nuanced framework that would provide ceremonial protections. It would provide kind of an ability to self-regulate for spiritual and religious communities, where if they're able to, for instance, provide community support, maybe they don't need as many paid facilitators to stand by and drive up the cost of services if it's being handled internally with the community and things like that. So that was another big piece of it is kind of the issues around facilitator to client ratios. And then one of the biggest pieces of them, and one that is really urgent right now, is around products and testing. This reflects the view of many religious communities that work with psilocybin, that the mushroom isn't just like a bottle of aspirin. It's not just like any other pharma drug or over-the-counter type of medication. It's treated like a spiritual sacrament, and it's handled with reverence, and it's grown carefully. And and the Western kind of medical models really don't. That's not how they view it, is according to those types of models. So this gives the proposed framework would give religious communities freedom to kind of grow their own sacrament in ways that kind of cohere with their beliefs and views around the products and that sort of thing, which has been communicated to me as being important to many communities that seriously work with these substances. And so that's a big part of it. And then another part of it is actually in the testing part, in part because, if you're looking for like concentration of psilocybin in a mushroom, to see, okay, and then you reverse calculate if this has so many, milligrams per gram, then how many grams of, mushroom do you get to, there's this kind of like math problem that people do to try to dial in like precision dosing. And within a lot of spiritual and religious communities that work with these substances, that they don't really they can't chalk up the the benefits that they receive from psilocybin to some kind of psychopharmacological process, or it's not just like because there's X milligrams of psilocybin that they're going to have X experience. They believe in a mystery around them, and a kind of they almost many of them in my understanding and in my experience with them, they will actually prefer some amount of unknownness and mystery into the experience, because they don't think that it's something that they can control and contain, and that there's a part of the surrender that people talk about with psychedelics that almost is better off not knowing than having exact scientific precision with that. And that the need to have exact scientific precision is itself kind of a reflection of the kind of Western medical model that is directly at odds with many people's spiritual kind of sacred practice, that says that these mechanisms, like these medicines, work through different routes and different ways of knowing. So for the testing rules to then require all products to be tested, every batch, even, not only is that kind of antithetical to certain religious practice, but it's also an unnecessary expense that just drives up the cost further and helps erect the paywalls that we're trying to not keep. So there's kind of a part there. So between products, testing, and kind of ceremonial rites, that's kind of the main bundle of sticks that the proposal has been trying to create. And with the products being grown on site at the church or the religious organization's location, it kind of creates this direct farm to table kind of sacrament that really empowers the community to own its own means of production, and basically have just the community not have to participate in this more corporate, more medical, more kind of regulated system. And it's not that there's not regulations in the religious proposal. It's just that it balances the costs and the safety and the accessibility issues just very ever so slightly differently, under the theory that a sincere religious community is going to treat these things differently than a luxury resort's going to. And in some ways, people who take this pursuant to sincere spiritual or religious practice are going to handle it with a different approach, and maybe because of that sincerity that they bring to the experience, they will likely they will be safer just by virtue of the spirit in which they enter the experience. So.
Wow, thank you, Jon. There's a lot of work to do and a lot to unpack there, and this is just one of the many kind of questions or conundrums to answer in a very short amount of time. So it feels a bit like kind of cramming for a bar exam. You're staying up late to get this, and this is a really important piece, and yet there's so many other pieces to this puzzle. I think the first thing I wanted to ask is, how on earth do we define what is a religion or spiritual practice or entheogenic church, and who gets to make that kind of definition in Oregon? Who has that tricky job?
That's a great question. The law struggles with this because there's strong case law that says that religion isn't for a judge to decide what's valid or not. A court's not supposed to ever make truth claims about whether or not, the religious history espoused by an organization or religious institution is historically accurate. They don't validate or invalidate claims that about metaphysics or any of that kind of stuff. So the role of the court, there's several ways that courts have wrestled with these issues in a broader federal context. But the answer is it's really hard to define what religious activity and what a religion actually is. And in our current system, where the DEA has this exemption process, they scrutinize every little aspect that they can to try to invalidate the sincerity or the practices, and try to poke holes, and it's really, I think, kind of degrading for people who go through that, to just feel like insulted, and have their like, not that they don't have to engage on a meaningful level, but just to be kind of distrusted, and like through that process. And to this day, the DEA, to my knowledge and to the knowledge of everyone else I've ever talked to about this subject, the DEA has never granted an exemption to a religious organization. Um, the only way that organizations have gotten those exemptions is by suing the federal government. And they have, and they've won, even up at the U.S. Supreme Court level and at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals level. So the question about what actually is a religion is a complex one, and there's lots of ways that courts have used. And so I think in the proposal, we've basically tried to couch this in terms of coherence with a sincerely held belief or conviction, and that the use of mushrooms in order to gain these privileges would have to be in furtherance of like a sincere, belief in practice. In part because I don't think the Oregon government wants to be forced to decide who's valid or not, because that's fraught with problems. And I don't think they want it. Nobody wants. I don't think Oregon government wants to do that. And I don't think practitioners want the Oregon government to do that. So I think everybody agrees that like there shouldn't be some kind of like religious, inquisition kind of, where somebody's around trying to like test everybody. Although Oregon could do that if it wanted to. And that, in my view, would be better than to do nothing at all with this question. But that is one of the kind of points that some people have trouble with about the proposal is the proposal would basically grant these privileges to people who sign an attestation that this is in furtherance of a sincere practice. And they'd also have to be limited to either a nonprofit organization or under my the most recent update, I've received stakeholder feedback about cooperatives being another like good community way that still kind of safeguards against the exploitation of religious liberties for profit motive. So that's kind of, we've added cooperatives to the list of types of organizations that would be eligible for these if they're recognized by the state. So they have to be basically organized on a not-for-profit basis, and signing an attestation that this is kind of a community. So that's why this really is a community-led effort, because it's not concentrating wealth or sending, at least that's not, it's designed to do the opposite of that, but to kind of, for communities to come together and pool resources. I mean, that's one of the things of, for me, having grown up in church, church communities, they pool resources, and that means money, it means time. I mean, people like my mom just moved a little bit ago, and on top of me helping her, some members from her church came up and lent some extra hands. And it's just the kind of thing that when you people come together in community, they help each other out, and that kind of pooling of resources can kind of serve as an alternative capital to just like the plain and cold exchange of money.
Beautiful, Jon. Thank you. And it's great to think about community, church, congregation as a container, like set and setting. Some people will love to go, to a very, medical feeling, with bright lights and, very maybe like a field trip kind of place, where everything's looking really kind of, beautiful designs and it's very sleek and expensive. They might like that. But yeah, some people might prefer just to go to their church where their friends are, where their community is, where they feel they belong. And that, from a set and setting perspective, feeling safe, feeling known, feeling a sense of belonging, that's a beautiful setting as a container.
Mm.
to feel spirit. And there's such a correlation between mystical experiences and the oneness of psychedelic use, and yeah, mental health outcomes and transformation. So it makes sense that that setting of being a part of a community, that you help each other, and it might be 1 week or 1 month. you know David helps John, and next time John helps David because I'm going through a tough time, and we help each other out as brothers and sisters in that community. It makes sense. Yes, it's a bit out of the box, but it really makes sense. Like, we're sending people to have sessions with doctors and nurses and therapists they don't know, and they might not have much in common with. And yeah, diversity, inclusion, cultural competence training is really important for clinicians and practitioners. But there's something to be said for belonging to a community congregation with brothers and sisters there. So yeah, it's really clicking about how it could make sense.
Yeah, I heard James Fadiman say on an interview he gave one time about the ideal characteristics of a facilitator. I think he called him a sitter, but whatever verbiage he used, he said, the absolute best case scenario is that the person who is sitting with you is somebody who loves you. And in a way, when we think about, this therapeutic model, you might have a positive relationship with your therapist or with the person that you go to, but at the end of the day, those relationships, whether we like to admit this or not, are about the exchange of money on a certain level. I mean, if there's a lot of people who can't go to therapy because they can't afford it, and therapists don't just typically offer services free of charge to people. And so a community that's organized, to support one another and to help one another, can really, I think, be the best case scenario. And really, and when you draw in community resources into like a psychedelic container, if you have like a community container for psychedelics, I think. I think it just, I mean, that's kind of the container that has existed since the beginning of humanity's relationship with psychedelics. It's always been in a community ceremonial type of context. And so to put paywalls and say this is like a different thing is just sort of at odds with kind of the history there.
And just touching on history, Oregon's a little bit famous for having just huge diversity of psilocybin containing mushrooms. And I think that's kind of Paul Stamets' stomping ground. And lots of mycologists kind of go there and, just trip out and like, oh, the sheer diversity of species. So what's actually happening now on the ground, to be honest, John? Like, you don't have to mention any names if you don't want to, but what has been the history of Oregon and psilocybin use, either kind of going back centuries or maybe just the last few decades? Like, because this isn't something from nothing. This is trying to take something already exists, and we're trying to not prevent that. We're trying to enable that to continue, I suppose. So what actually is happening at the moment around Oregon psilocybin use and entheogenic practitioners in churches?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So there's not any indigenous use for as many species and how prevalent as some of those are of psilocybin containing mushrooms that naturally occur that are native to this part of the world. There's virtually no recorded evidence of an indigenous like use in Oregon. I've heard some rumors that there might be, and as we see many places, you know, there might not be exact. Indigenous people are smart enough to sometime, uh, to know perhaps that disclosing those practices may not be to their advantage. I've heard that there has been some practices that have just been kept underground, and I'm not in a position to validate that, but that's an interesting kind of study that I hope gets done. Or maybe maybe it shouldn't be done. Maybe it should stay there. that's maybe also a comforting thought, is that maybe us white people never need to know about it, and that can just be something that's theirs and theirs alone, and that might be just perfectly fine. But the yeah, in terms of, in the more kind of Western side of things, there has been proliferating culture underground of mushroom use, and I think the Radical Mycology Conference is in Oregon and has been in Portland, is my understanding. And so there's just kind of a culture of that here too, that's pretty vibrant.
Yeah. And have you had entheogenic practitioners or churches in Oregon kind of giving depositions or kind of public sharing about how this piece that you're so passionate about, what are they saying about what they want to see happening here?
Yeah. Oh, so we started kind of as the proposal came out, and started getting endorsement from official committees at the board. It occurred to me that if it's just one or two people saying, this is something that matters to us, that doesn't carry political salience. What the state probably needs in order to really understand the breadth and scope of this issue and how important it is to hear from a diverse community of practitioners about their practice. And so a group of us who initially were kind of closely following the Measure 109 rulemaking started getting together and talking about ways that we can just help educate around why entheogenic practice really deserves a place at the table if the psychedelic landscape is big enough to accommodate like medical and therapeutic and recreational applications. It's only fitting that it also include kind of a place for religious use. And so we've identified that there's just a lot of educating that needs to be done around those issues. So we started an organization called the Entheogenic Practitioners Council of Oregon. We're very new. I mean, this is all happening really quick, just because like time is almost out to make a difference in Oregon's process. So we've been trying to build capacity to just really help identify the voices that need to be brought into the official conversations in Oregon. And we just started a petition in support of the proposal, which has a hard deadline of April 20th. In short, we are in the middle of a public comment period right now, which the written period runs until April 21st. And so if you can submit an email to the state, and I think we'll put a link or the email address in the show notes.
Yeah, you got it.
But we have the chance to basically let our voices be heard, to let the state know that entheogenic practice is something that matters. If we don't get submit comments in by 5 p.m. Pacific on the 21st, essentially we lose the chance forever to offer that input into the first set of rules for a psychedelic services program. So it's really important that the state hear from those of us who feel strongly about these issues, and essentially the rules that were drafted really. Like the comment period is limited to the proposed rules that have been published, and those are only on products testing and training. And the entheogenic proposal discusses, as we talked about, products and testing issues that we think matter to entheogenic communities. And so instead of including, in the proposed rules, something that would support that, Oregon did the exact opposite thing, which was include in their defenses as to why they're not going to do anything about it, which is really upsetting to many of us. They even acknowledge, I mean, For instance, they say testing rules require psilocybin products to undergo certain tests before they may be sold. Licensed psilocybin manufacturers will pay costs to perform required tests. A portion of these costs could be ultimately passed on to clients. It's like that. Like that's and then it says, with respect to products, while communities that have historically produced and consumed psilocybin products in a manner inconsistent with these rules could be adversely impacted, the products rules are based on public health and safety recommendations. So they're really just like defending uh, the exclusion of these communities from the measure, based on nondescript public health and safety recommendations, which nobody, to my knowledge, has ever been adversely harmed. I'm sure somebody has. I mean, I'm not saying it hasn't happened ever. I've never heard of it. A person who's been harmed by a product because it wasn't tested, like a mushroom product that harm could have been avoided had it been tested before somebody ate it. That's not a situation I've ever heard happen. Um, so to think that sincere religious community couldn't navigate a little bit of ambiguity or imprecision in dosing is, so they've acknowledged the problem and they're just saying we're not going to do anything about it. And so this is our chance for the state to hear from people who care about this to say this is not acceptable.
Mm. So, in an ideal world, John, would there be a clause or a section of this service that pertains to religious liberty and kind of entheogenic use? And it may well have some kind of criteria to be compliant with, but they wouldn't be prohibitive. Is that how it could look? Is that what you're hoping to have? That it will be kind of spelt out in a way that is kind of make sure that it's accessible to existing and future kind of religious practitioners?
Yeah, so the proposed framework kind of comes up with a way to try to balance like the legitimate safety concerns of the state. I mean, we're not saying the state that there's no safety risk or anything like that. In fact, those safety risks are very real, which is why we need to invite entheogenic practice above ground so it can operate in the light of day. I keep on my computer screen. This name here, I don't know if you can see it, is my messy handwriting.
Brandon Begley.
Brandon Begley. Brandon Begley was a person who died actually at a ayahuasca church in Florida at the Soul Quest Church, and he died. It's my understanding from taking ayahuasca and Cambo together repeatedly over multiple days, and then drinking a lot of water. I think there's actually the over drinking too much water was the medical cause of death. But these are things that are happening in the context of legal gray areas where there's not the same types of oversight and accountability. So when Oregon thinks about how unsafe entheogenic practice is in a regulated system, I think what it's missing from its analysis is how safe entheogenic practice is in an unregulated system. And if it doesn't create rules that encourage and promote people from practicing above ground, then it drives people into these places where there's less safeguards, there's less oversight, where people can't call the police if there's abuse that happens, where people can't really call medical attention if there's problems. By forcing entheogenic practice underground, it's far less safe than products that aren't tested, in a licensed and regulated program. So I think if the paywalls around this program cause a session to cost $1,000 or more, people aren't going to do it. They're going to continue to be underground, and so it's this part of the analysis that's just sorely lacking from these conversations that Oregon, I think, just has. As this is done by the Oregon Health Authority, I mean, there are health consequences to, not allow to forcing this activity to be illegal, which is what these rules may do if they're not drafted with sensitivity to the practices that sincere communities insist on, and also the costs that go into the program. So I continue to be challenged by Brandon Begley's horrible death. I mean, I think that he, in a way, is a victim of the war on drugs, because uh, if 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 Oregon 109 would have been around at the time, and if that church would have been operating under a similar type of program, I really don't think that would have happened to him. And so I think Oregon's decision making really needs to take a long and hard look at comparing the risks of underground and above ground practice, and not just say, because there's some risks, that this is, that we can't allow it.
Yeah, and from a harm reduction perspective, we want those folks that are operating in the underground to feel safe to say, yeah, this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. And definitely, if they don't feel safe, then they're going to stay in the underground. And if there could be a track within this psilocybin kind of program that's an entheogenic track, a religious and spiritual track, then it might mean that, yeah, those parameters can be crafted by the folks that are going to be doing this. And I wanted to ask a question around facilitation of the psilocybin services and ceremonies within this kind of entheogenic model or track that you're kind of advocating for to be included. Because if it's not included, it remains illegal. And so what's the role of the facilitator potentially, or is there another word that we're using in respect to the entheogenic track?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question. The facilitator under the program would, they're still required. So part of the challenge in drafting this is trying to fit it in the generally applicable, like, four corners of Measure 109. And Measure 109 requires at least one facilitator to be present at all times where psilocybin's being consumed. And it also requires that facilitator not take psilocybin. So facilitators will still be there, and they'll still, under the measure, have to do screening. They'll have to do intake. They'll still have to offer integration after the fact. So those are some really basic, and I think much needed and well placed safeguards to just ensure people are safe, and that contraindications are identified and discussed and addressed in a transparent and healthy way. And then, but in the terms of the session itself, the general assumption is that most facilitation is going to be in a non-directive manner anyway. And so if a facilitator isn't taking psilocybin and is, observing or supervising a ceremony, they're kind of, I think Jonathan Goldman from Santo Daime Church has said, like, how many of them do we need outside just watching Netflix?
Right.
Because unless there's some kind of problem, they're just going to be like a potted plant sitting there. And that's, I think, the real role of the facilitator in at least an entheogenic session will be the prep and the post, but not as much during, unless there's a situation that requires some assistance. And so that's kind of the part of it. And so the proposal would give communities the option to have the facilitator wait outside of the ceremonial space, so they can observe, as long as they can hear and be aware and alert of what's going on, so that they can spring into action if trouble happens or something's needed. So they're right there on hand, but they're not going to be like actively like leading the ceremony or anything like that. I mean, I think in most cases. So I think their role is more important at the beginning of it.
Yeah, that's really important when you're just sharing there, John, about this entheogenic track, and that's my word of using it, but that entheogenic religious option that a participant might have to say, I want to go down that way. This is how I want my experience to be, rather than going to my doctors or with a different practitioner. That it's still happening within the larger system, and it's still compliant with all of these other criteria around I guess it's assessment and preparation and integration. So it's still compliant in that. It's just giving a different kind of user experience and kind of qualitative feel that the participant themselves chooses with their own religious liberty. Everything else is compliant. They're just saying, this is how I want my experience to be.
Yeah, I mean, for the people who have seemed opposed to the proposal, it's almost surprising of how. I mean, the proposal really is very much in alignment with everything else within Measure 109. It's just a few things that are relaxed to make the program, culturally sensitive, to make it more affordable, to make it more community oriented and less, and give the option of having less money be exchanged in the provision of services. It doesn't require that it be totally removed. So, for the if people want to have a really like a mega church, maybe not with like thousands of people necessarily, but some kind of opulent, high end, like Joel Osteen type of, maybe that, prosperity gospel. I mean, there's probably room for that sort of thing, even though that's not what I think it'll happen. But it's not anti money. It's just it's pro access. But yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of this a mega Compass Pathways Church opening up in Portland. That would be quite a thing. Yeah, thanks for going into that. So we're almost out of time, but I know when we spoke before, Jon, we were talking about Maria Sabina, and obviously, she her role when it comes to psilocybin-containing mushrooms and the West. So, do you want to just have a moment to share about her?
I love this question. I think it is so important that we invite Maria Sabina into this conversation. So-called magic mushrooms in the West got their start with Maria Sabina, and the impact that this has had, that her inviting strangers into her community and to offer to share these medicines, these sacraments that they'd stewarded for her community for hundreds or thousands of years. It just resulted in total or lots of harm came to her and her community as a result of it, such that near the end of her life, she said that from the moment the foreigners arrived, the holy children lost their purity. Holy children meaning the mushrooms. They lost their force. The Westerners ruined them. Henceforth, they'll no longer work, and there's no remedy for it. And when we think about cultural sensitivity and the impact that that we have as we draft this program, I think we have to really seriously consider her and her what role she plays in Oregon's program. And I think that I've kind of tried to sum it down into two questions that we as Oregonians must ask ourselves when deciding what Oregon's rules should look like. And the first of those is, if Maria Sabina were alive today, would Oregon's program allow her to lead her ceremony here?
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is, if Maria Sabina were alive today, would the Oregon rules allow her to afford ceremony here? And if the answer to either of those two questions is no, then Oregon has really crafted a program that perpetuates inequities in a major way.
Jon, thank you. Those two questions are extremely powerful. Yeah. And if the answers are no to either of those, yeah, then we're doing a disservice to humanity. Let's be honest with ourselves, because we are spiritual beings. I wish we could talk more about that. We're spiritual beings, and we live in a war-torn, traumatic world, and we need healing and we need community. And psychedelics contain, a history of healing humans and of connecting us to spirit and our soul. And just maybe if in Oregon there could be the inclusion of this entheogenic kind of religious liberty piece, that goes some way to reconnecting humanity to our spirit, our soul. And we need that so desperately right now. And if it's not included, then we're just going to keep going on with this kind of clinical medical model of pathologizing. And I know Oregon's really being really brave already, without a doubt, with being out the box. But yeah, humanity needs to reconnect with our spirit and come together as a oneness of our community on our planet in this incredible universe. So I think it's beautiful that you brought the wisdom and of Maria Sabina into the conversation. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, David. I just, as please, for those listening, I think there'll be a link to the petition that we're circulating in the show notes. It's important that our voices be heard. Please sign the petition and share it freely. Our goal is to get 1,000 signatures on it. We'd like also 1,000 emails. We'd like to really just make sure the people of Oregon who are making these rules know how important this is, and they're not going to know that unless we let them know. So this is a unique historical chance to make something really good happen here. And if we let this pass us by, it only becomes more difficult as the psychedelics industrial complex will become stronger and more entrenched. So this is, as I see it, perhaps one of our best chances that we may ever have to get this right and to make community psychedelic healing available to all people.
Thank you, John. And like you said before, it's much easier to build something right than to kind of knock it down and rebuild it and try and reform it. So we've done that in the past. We've made bad decisions and then spent decades fighting to change something and not got that far. So this is a chance to kind of build it in the right way as a model. So we will put your links on our show notes. Just let us know, again, when the deadline is for people to send emails and to sign the petition. And is it open to non-Oregonians, to anyone in America or around the world? Who exactly, are we calling out to?
Yes, that is a great question. It's available to everybody. Anyone can weigh in on the petition or in an email to the state or at the two verbal comment periods on April 18th from 5 to 7 Pacific and from April 21st from 10 to noon Pacific. Both of those are available for anyone who cares about these topics to weigh in. I think because this is a issue of great national and international and historic concern, it's important that, I don't think Oregon's just limiting it to Oregon residents, but if you are an Oregon resident, I think your voice will matter a little bit more. I mean, they all matter, but I think Oregon, I think they want to hear probably, especially from Oregonians. So especially if you live in Oregon, it is just extra critical that you weigh in, let the state know that you support entheogenic practitioner privileges.
Thank you. Okay, so listeners, please, if this resonates with you, heed the call. This is kind of history in the making. Jon Dennis, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your work, dedication for this fight, and for sanctifying humanity's spiritual essence. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you, David, and thank you to Psychedelics Today for just giving a platform for this to happen, because I don't think we'd be having this conversation if it weren't for the great work that you all are doing.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks so much, Jon. All right, everybody. David Drapkin, Jon Dennis, wishing you a wonderful day. God bless.